in your portfolio that the design for Zomato is data driven.
Mm.
So can you tell me the process of making sense of this data that you get from the all the research and the feedback processes that you do?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of like I was saying, there's qualitative and quantitative data. So
Yeah.
let's maybe talk about quantitative
Okay.
now. Um, we have a big data system here called Jumbo,
Okay.
which kind of tracks all the API calls that are happening
Okay.
through the apps, for example. So basically, you know how many people bookmarked a restaurant today, how many people wrote a review,
Yeah.
if they're ordering food, how many people ended up placing the order, and how many people dropped off the funnel. So as we're getting to new features on the app or redesigning an app, we'll look at each of these sections separately.
Okay.
So I can give you a few examples. When we were redesigning the order flow, we noticed that a lot of the returning users who have already placed an order before had to do as many steps as a new user,
Yeah.
which felt a little bit like unnecessary. So what we did is we said, okay, cool, let's set defaults for returning users. So for them, it'll be like a one-step checkout.
Okay.
And new users obviously have to give us more information. So
Yeah.
that's one place where we saw drop-offs from returning users, and then we tried to reduce the number of steps for them. And now we kind of track, you know, what is the effect of that, and have we moved conversions to an actual order from that. We also see the data, and we sometimes decide, you know, should we keep a feature on the app or should we remove it?
Okay.
A lot of times we'll add a new feature or remove a feature if you know the data is saying that it's not used or there's a large scope for use.
Okay.
You know, in case we remove features, sometimes a lot of passionate users will write to us and say, "Why did you get rid of this?
Yeah.
We want it back. We use it for this reason." So for those situations, we either decide to bring it back,
Okay.
or we kind of explain to them, you know, this is why we you know, removed something or changed it. In terms of you know, recommendations for ads and for restaurants and places you might like, that's all data driven now. So that's where we're not looking at past data, but we're saying, you know, we have a machine learning system. It should be able to recommend to people what's best for them. So that's another way that we use data now for, like, you know, experience within the app real time.
Okay, so this research that you're carrying out is for India. Let's talk about India only.
Mm.
How do you carry research when you're designing for an audience like India? What use cases or storytelling
Yeah.
characters or personas you go forward with? And adding to it, in the future when the product's live and you have justified to the person or that you have adapted at the start, do you add more personas or stories to it?
Mm.
For example, making the app more usable for a housewife, or
Yeah.
let's say an old uncle.
Yeah.
So do you keep building on that, or is your TG really focused and you are not expecting it to expand for like next few maybe dedicated time of year?
Okay. So yeah, I'll start with your first question.
Yeah.
We definitely have a user, you know, user segments that we look at.
Okay.
So I think we think more in terms of user scenarios, and then also like purchasing power and demographics. So what I mean is, one thing is when you go out to eat or you order food, obviously how much money you're willing to spend is a big factor,
Yeah.
and your location also matters. So we typically try to look at college students, working professional, and then families.
Okay.
And then we try to look at what is the situation that we're going to be putting them in. So are they right now ordering food home? Are they going out to eat? Are they planning to go out to party? So like nightlife?
Okay.
Or are they planning to take away food from like a cafe? So that's kind of the scenario that we start with. And then we say, like, let's go target these types of people to talk to about how do they go about that situation.
Okay.
So right now we're doing something around payments. So we spoke to college students and they use more cash and less of their card.
Okay.
And working professionals use mostly their credit card.
Yeah.
And families don't really split the bill. Usually one person pays.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things help us understand like what are the behaviors of these groups of people.
Yeah. So talking about splitting the bills, is Zomato going on that front to provide the facility to users to like there's an app called Splitwise that
Yeah,
does it for
yeah.
users. So and it's the standalone app that is doing it for the user. So
Yeah.
there's Zomato, because payments is included in the consumer journey of your TG.
Yeah.
So is Zomato going into that domain now, or any time in the
Uh,
future?
we're thinking about it. We're actually prototyping a few things right now to see how can we help the user with their dining experience.
Okay.
So ordering, interacting with the waiter, paying the bill, and then exiting. So as you've seen, we've done a lot in terms of efficiency and change with ordering food online.
Okay.
But we're seeing how can we kind of enter the dining in experience also. So we are like looking into those things a little bit. And then the other question you had was how does your use cases and stuff change over time? Yeah, it's definitely, I think we only know 50% of what's going to actually happen before something is released. So definitely when it comes to the consumer side, a lot of times, we'll add a feature and either it's not used or it has like some terminology that people cannot associate with, or it's placed in a way that's hard to access or not accessed often. So then we'll see the data for that and say that, this is not what we expected in terms of behavior. Let's either change the positioning, let's rebrand the feature a little bit. Maybe it's not actually meeting the use case that the user needs. So we kind of iterate on that stuff all the time. We even iterate on like writing a review flow, which is one of our basic flows from like the last 10 years. But that's still seeing improvements all the time. And on the merchant side, definitely all the time we make a feature and then we see that there's a whole different use case for it. So, a lot of times restaurants will update information on their page. But really what they're doing is it's a holiday today, so that's why they update their opening hours just for today. But it's something they should revert, and sometimes they forget, sometimes it's not done. So then we know that, okay, annual holidays is like a feature we should add to the app, for example. So those are the kinds of ideas we get after we launch a version of the app, and we use that feedback to keep improving.
So it's kind of calendar feature that you're giving to the merchant side to manage the opening and closing timings for the restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay, so talking about checking out and payments. So there's the two terms in your portfolio. You talk about crystal and there's checkout.
Yeah.
So can you just explain what these terms mean and how does Zomato work on it?
Yeah, sure. So it's a online ordering feature. So basically, you go on Zomato, you're like, I want to get pizza tonight, and then you open the menu, and from the point of adding items to from the menu, so let's say like a veg pizza and a cheese pizza, to the point where you are checking the items and then making the payment, that's the checkout flow. So basically, adding items to cart and paying. And then the second part is crystal, which is where things actually go into the offline space. So that's when the order is sent to the kitchen of the restaurant, all the way to being prepared in the kitchen, the order is on its way, and then finally, has the order been delivered to you on time? And we call it crystal because once you get into the offline space, it's very important for us to be crystal clear of what's happening with your food. So you've already paid for it, we have a responsibility to get it to you. And we've done a lot of cool things with Crystal. We've shown status of what the food, where the food is right now. We now have a part of the company called Runner, which actually does food delivery. So we are getting into the delivery space too, and we have like live order tracking. And actually, it was very cool. The app teams built the tracking of the guy on the motorcycle within the space of a few days. And it's almost like I think they almost got to like Uber quality in terms of tracking a car. Obviously, difference in manpower and stuff, but so now you can track your order as it's coming to your doorstep.
This is a new feature.
Yeah. So if you go on Zomato and you see live tracking available on one of the restaurants, you'll see the map now, and you'll be able to watch the order get to your door. So that's a big change we made. And yeah, at the end, we really try to get you help if you don't get your food on time. So we ask you, have you gotten your food? If not, we redirect you to chat immediately. So basically, we're trying to be on the customer side through the whole thing, and then also help the merchant along the way. So that's checkout and Crystal.
So talking about Crystal, Crystal has some train station stops at
Mhm.
this show.
Yeah.
And these, as far as I can think of it, it is dependent on how the restaurant is, replying to it. So a restaurant needs to confirm order. A
Hmm.
restaurant needs to take actions
Yeah.
to for that system to work. So it's a lot reliable on the merchant side, as far as I
Hmm.
can see. So even though you have built a great feature, it's still dependent on how it is operated now,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Basically, is there a process that the merchant side has explained? You
Hmm.
know, if the order is prepared, you need to press this button, do
Yeah.
that, or something. How is that? How is the crucial process
On the
being done on
merchants.
the back side of it?
Got it. So, yeah, so let's say you placed an order and I'm the
Okay.
merchant.
Okay.
So the item now comes to my kitchen. So we actually have a dedicated device at the merchant side,
Okay.
which rings like it's like an alarm anytime a new order comes in.
Okay.
So it rings and then you open it and then you see that order is from Ronak and he wants whatever items.
Yeah.
You send it to the kitchen at that time, and if you don't reply within, I think 1 or 2 minutes, our customer care support at Zomato calls the restaurant and says, hey, you got a new order,
Hmm.
you are online and you should be accepting them. Please go offline if you cannot, but can you accept this order or not? So that's when our team gets involved to make sure that you are not waiting for too long.
Okay.
And then they also let us know when it's in kitchen and when it's out for delivery. Again, we have, I think, some buffer within which we look at travel time for them to go from their kitchen to the user. And if that time is taking too long, we call the kitchen again and say, hey, have you dispatched the order yet? According to traffic, it might take time and we don't want the food to be late.
Okay.
So then we get in touch with them again if needed. But we really try to empower them and ask them to please, keep the restaurant and the customer updated. It's better user experience. People will come back to eat with you.
Yeah.
The food will still be hot. So like, we try to encourage them to do everything on their own. And then we intervene if we feel that either they have forgotten to respond or maybe they have very high volumes and the customer needs some information.
Okay. So time is an important factor when it comes
Yeah.
to delivery.
Yeah.
And one of the companies out there has actually, it's a delivery company. They have kept the time factor as the USP.
Mm.
So what is Zomato doing in that direction? It's not about delivering the food in lesser time, but it's giving a satisfactory number to them.
Yeah.
It will reach in this number of time, this number of minutes, and then delivering in that minute itself.
Yeah.
So, is there any process or is there any tech innovation that has been done in Zomato to take care of that?
Yeah, so we have a big enough data team that's always looking at expected delivery time and actual delivery time.
Okay.
And based on that, they decide, what number that's fair to show to the restaurant and to the customer in terms of when will you get food. Uh, Definitely things like under 30 minutes, within 20 minutes, all of those types of catch lines are awesome. And we do that when we can.
Okay.
So we'll send push notifications like, hey, there's 10 restaurants around you that deliver within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But we also need to have that trade-off that's reasonable so that you don't get food that's undercooked or like hastily packed just in order to meet a time limit.
Yeah.
So we still want to make sure quality is, preserved. But yeah, we definitely look at these times. We look at data and trends over time. We use traffic data that we find. And these teams are always improving these numbers and trying to find ways to help customers access the restaurants near them that can also deliver as fast as possible. So you should always have that option, but it should also be reasonable in terms of getting the food quality you deserve. So yeah, we have a team for that.
So talking about Crystal
Yeah.
and features like Crystal and features like Zomato Gold and Treats, how much time does adding this feature take from start from ideation to research to design to development and finally hitting the live product?
Yeah.
So what is the time span does it take?
So I would say I think treats took about 2 months from the idea all the way to going live. So 1 month of design and about 1 month of development.
Okay.
So the nice thing about something like Treats is it's already fitted into the menu and the checkout flow.
Yeah.
So the development was a little less in terms of new user interfaces, but more in terms of logic. That's where the time went in. Gold, I think, took about 3 to 4 months. So one thing is we learned a lot from our UAE and Portugal gold experiences. So we changed that a little for India. And also, I think the business teams had to rethink how gold would work in India because it's a different country.
Yeah.
So I think that took about a month of design and about 2 to 3 months of business and development.
Okay.
And still now you'll see, a gold launch will come up, and there has to be some marketing design done, some tech done as well. So gold is always running in sprints. Treats not as much, it kind of runs on its own.
Okay.
So yeah, it takes between like 2 to 4 months usually for these features.
So since you mentioned gold again, so what is the reason behind pushing gold as subscription that comes once in a month, or is there a reason that only 10,000 subscriptions are given out at a time?
So one thing is we want to definitely keep a viral factor to it.
Yeah.
I think one way of like increasing excitement and stuff is when you say that there's a limited amount, and that's not just for virality. It's also for making sure that restaurants are not overloaded.
Yeah.
Making sure that too many users are not using gold at once, that the revenue for the business is sacrificed.
Yeah.
Making sure that restaurants can also keep up with the demand of the number of users coming in with gold.
Okay.
So all those things kind of play a factor. So we definitely have to manage supply and demand equally, and that's a big reason why we only let out certain number of subscriptions at a time.
Okay, so we were talking about how much time these features take to go out.
Yeah.
And how much time did the complete app redesign that happened recently? How much
Yeah.
time did that take?
Yeah, so that took about 4 months actually.
Okay.
4 to maybe even 5 months. I think you should give a month for just testing.
Okay.
About a month of real design, and then the 2 to 3 months in between were design and development working together.
Yeah.
So yeah, that.
So how does Zomato take care of keeping the design and the development team in sync? Because it's important for the product to be a good experience also.
Yeah. So one thing is we run in sprints. So we do about 2 week sprints, and each of us as a designer, we sit with the development team that we need to work with a lot of the times.
Okay.
So we sit together, but then we're close enough to the dev team to know that, okay, you guys have finished this and this is pending on us. So we'll get this done today. And usually our design sprint runs one sprint ahead of development. So we're usually finishing design by the time they start making it. And we have a lot of teams do stand-ups, 10-minute stand-ups every morning with the designer and the dev team and the product owner. So that's a big way we keep in sync. And if an app release has to go out in the next few days, the designer will go and essentially just sit with the devs and make sure that everything's coordinated.
So design sprints are a popular term.
Yeah.
You've read about it. There's a book about it. What is the development sprint?
So a development sprint starts first with like mock-ups and the business goals. So they really need to know why they're making something. I think they should feel convinced. Then they usually separate into front end and back end.
Yeah.
So if you look at apps, usually the back end has to create APIs, and the front end guys have to make the UI. So for them, usually the back end team is making the APIs while the front end team is making the UI. And in the last few days, they'll sit together and kind of connect the two sides with plugs, essentially. And then they do some QA. They have to make sure that everything works reliably. Many times they'll come up with edge cases that we never thought of and they never thought of. So then we'll sit together with design and say, hey, what if this happens or what if that happens? And then we'll make new flows on how to engage users through those edge cases also. And then those get incorporated into development. So, and also they have to keep their stakeholders in the loop, make sure they're releasing the app on time. So all of that, I think, is a development sprint.
So you're talking about the sync between the development team, the design team, and the QA team. So apart from the design team, it happens quite often that the development team comes up with a feature or an
Hmm.
edge case to you. So there has been a buzz around the industry that should designers code too, so
Yeah.
that or should developers be trained in design also.
Yeah.
So what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think it really helps if you know a little bit of, so if you know a little bit of how to empathize with the other person.
Yeah.
So I think like similar to how user research says you should be able to sit in their shoes a little bit. I think if a designer is able to know at least the basics of coding,
Yeah.
that really helps empathize with the developer when they say like, dude, this will take a long time, or
Yeah.
like this is not as easy as we think, or you design this really awesome cool thing, but like it'll take time to actually make it so perfect.
Yeah.
So I think it helps designers become a little more realistic with our designs when we know how much the coding effort could be.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean you need to have expertise, right? You can always go sit with the developer and have an initial conversation and say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think in terms of this? And can you teach me a little bit as well?
Yeah.
And on the other side, we actually, one of our designers, he's like our fifth designer. He is a developer who was on the design team for a long time.
Okay.
And he basically does some design and some development. So let's say the app has to get released. He'll be able to make last minute icons or redesign some small parts if we're not available. And I think having a little bit of that design sense is helpful because as a developer, you'll also have this gut feeling of like, hey, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Maybe the designer didn't spend enough time on this, or let me go give them some suggestions.
Yeah.
And anyone, can pick up paper and a pen and draw what they think is a good idea.
Yeah.
And we tell them to do that. We're like, dude, if you can come up with a better idea, let's talk in an hour and like tell me like what you think we can do. And I think it helps everyone use both sides of their brain a little bit if you can do a little bit of each.
It's good for the product.
Yeah. Yeah, and you also feel a little more like agile. You feel a little more like you're in control because you're not completely isolated from either side.
Yeah.
So I think it's something like I'm doing is learning JavaScript now, and even my portfolio I made on my own with HTML and CSS and stuff. So I think it's good to have some of that practice as a designer.
You have a great portfolio. You should check out the portfolio Aiswarya. It's Kolisetty.com.
Yeah.
I'll put the link in the bio. Yeah.
Thanks. I doesn't need it.
It's a great inspiration for any designer who's making a portfolio.